Hey, thank you for checking out this first episode of our little limited podcast series, Freddy versus Jason. I'm Freddy Morris. I'm one of the hosts of Night of the Living podcast, and Jason Kretten's with me. He's a host of Radio HorrorHound.
Radio at HorrorHound.
Radio HorrorHound Europe.
It's pretty bad, Radio. Freddy, considering you're on the show.
It is, but also, you know, a little bit of a flake.
HorrorHound Radio.
Yeah, that's hilarious that I called it Radio HorrorHound.
Actually, you know, I kind of like how that rolls off the tongue.
It sounds classier.
It does.
Yeah. You guys should consider changing it to Radio HorrorHound, and we could all get berets and neck scarves and shit. Do it like NPR.
A neckerchief.
Yeah. So we had this was like one of those obvious things that was just under our nose the whole time, that I'm Freddy and he's Jason.
It's very true.
So like I've always said that my favorite horror franchise is A Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's just a coincidence. And then Jason's favorite
100% coincidence
is Friday the 13th, which is also just a coincidence, right? Like
absolutely a coincidence.
So we were like, what if we pitted each film that is the hard brand films, and by what I mean by that is like in Friday the 13th, that would be the films that feature an adult Jason.
Yes.
And versus the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, which all feature Freddy Krueger.
That's true. There are no fake Freddys.
And there's no real winners or losers here.
We'll see how it goes.
And I've even considered like whether we should have like a system of points that we award in categories. And I'm going to, as we get through the show, we're kind of feeling our way through this first episode. Like if you have to compare apples to apples, what you have to do then is you have to break each of these movies down into what they are as a movie, but also like horror tropes, things that are expected, unexpected, and that sort of thing. So like, I almost feel like the point system, like actually declaring a winner at the end, I don't necessarily even want to do that.
It's a good idea. The other problem with that is there's so many more Friday movies.
Right. Yeah. So you can't base it on kill count.
No. Yeah. And Jason wins that.
I don't like to think of movies as really being in competition with each other anyway.
Of course.
Like, I've never been a fan of like, in my adult life, like award shows and stuff. As a thinking adult, you look at that and you realize what that really is when it comes to art.
Yes. I would say I'm always hooked on top 10 list.
Yeah.
And I've always done that my entire life. But the older I get, the more I do understand exactly what you mean. Like you can't really compare art and opinion.
Right. And also it's kind of disingenuous on, you know, no offense to anybody that likes making top 10 lists. A lot of my friends do that.
You're talking to me.
And I get that, because it's really an exercise for the individual sometimes just to look at like what you appreciate the most.
Yes.
But when a group like the Academy or when MTV or any of these other groups do it, it's always a self-interest thing, and it has nothing to do with the quality.
Well, sure. And like I just said, it is literally impossible to say this movie is better than that movie. You know, like, yeah, it's opinion.
Right. And
it's everyone's opinion.
I used to argue with Kelly from Night of the Living podcast sometimes about like, he would say there is such a thing as an objectively good and objectively bad movie, which I think he doesn't feel that way anymore, honestly, after all these years of.
I have to say,
yeah,
I don't know if I don't agree with that.
Yeah. I think that's for people. If you love movies, there's no objectively bad movie.
I agree with that.
If you don't love movies, if you really don't love them the way like someone who just loves, I love movies.
Yeah.
I'll watch something that is objectively a terrible movie
of course.
Usually, and I'll find something to like in it. So like that all being said, I think that like lays the groundwork of who we are and where we kind of stand going into this, because I don't want anybody's expectation to think that it's like a contest of these movies versus each other. It's more just a fun coincidence.
Freddie and I are going to fist fight at the end of every episode. And that's how we determine the winner. We
save all that for a group text. The two films we're matching up this week are Friday the 13th Part 2. Steve Miner, right? Directed that one. From 1981, it cost $1.25 million to make, versus A Nightmare on Elm Street which came along 3 years later. Wes Craven, The House That Freddy Built. This is the movie that cost $1.8 million, but returned so much that it floated New Line Cinema into a whole era of other movies.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
We just had to, not to sidetrack, but
no,
to me, Nightmare on Elm Street, to me, looks like a very big budgeted movie.
Yeah, and these
I guess back at a time.
Yeah. Even then, that was not a super large budget.
Yeah.
10 years later, TV shows were like $1 million. There were TV shows that were $1 million an episode. You know what I mean?
That's true.
I don't think that was necessarily considered a large budget in any respect, but just to show, it looks like resource-wise, you had kind of the scrappy Nightmare on Elm Street coming up, and you already had kind of the established Friday the 13th because the first movie is so successful.
Uh-huh.
So I do think that little bit of extra budget that Nightmare had really is inconsequential when you look at the advantage that Friday the 13th had going into it. If you're just looking at them as products, which again, like I said earlier, I don't like that. So I just wanted to address in the beginning that we are starting with resource wise, these two creative teams kind of started at square one together. It's not that much different. Setting wise, something that never really occurred to me is that Friday the 13th Part 2 does not take place at Camp Crystal Lake.
Nope. Yep.
This viewing, I caught that for the first time.
Uh-huh.
Do you know the name of the place?
Oh, geez, you're going to test me on that?
I'm just curious if you notice. I never noticed this before this viewing.
You're going to say it, and I'm going to kick myself.
It's the Packanack Lake Region Counselor Training Center.
I remember the Packanack.
Yeah, which is a real place.
Is it?
I looked it up. Yeah, it's in New Jersey, which is where they filmed, all the movies. Huh. I don't know about all of them, but
no, I do actually, because I rewatched the Friday the 13th franchise probably once a year, and I did always remember that. It's that guy Ted.
Yeah,
mentioning oh yeah, we share a lake with it.
Yeah, so it's basically another camp along the coast of Crystal Lake. I shouldn't say Camp Crystal, along the coast of Crystal Lake, right? Is that the lake that they share?
Yeah, this is going to be fascinating because I'm not going to jump ahead, but I don't know if Part 3 takes place at Crystal Lake either.
Yeah, because I feel like after the first movie, Camp Crystal Lake was shut down because of the murders.
Yeah,
and they started calling it Camp Blood.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just kind of in the only and it seems like what is the where's the crossover? What's the spark? Is it that they cross over into his camp at some point that gets the ball rolling with this?
On this one?
Because there's a weird moment with the cold open on this one where he leaves his stomping grounds, which struck me as I never thought about it until this
I think pretty much the only time in the franchise he does that, where he leaves to seek revenge specifically.
Yeah.
But it could be argued, again, the Friday the 13th franchise is, again, if you go back to the first one, Sean Cunningham only made it to get his name.
Oh, yeah.
To get his name on a resume. And it was kind of freestyled. You can kind of tell.
Yeah.
And then also one was so successful, they made two relatively pretty quick.
Was sold on a body count.
Yes.
And two sticks with the formula.
Yep.
But I think they up the ante, when what you're getting in this, and we get into the origins after we talk about these two settings, I think is interesting kind of how this movie really kicks off in the second one.
It could be argued that the opening of Friday the 13th Part 2 almost feels like a Halloween movie.
Yeah. Well,
it feels like a Michael Myers kill.
It was also kind of cribbing from Halloween anyway.
Yeah. I mean, the little kid running down the street.
Yeah. Because you think about what Cunningham did with that is the same thing that the producers of the original Blob did, where they looked at receipts, box office receipts.
Mm-hmm.
And what they said was, okay, we need to make money. What are the two genres of movie that brought in the most ticket sales last summer? And it was teen movies and monster movies. And so they created the first teen monster movie with the Blob because it was a business decision. They put the
and
two
they put a 30-year-old Steve McQueen in it.
Yeah, was he 30 then?
I don't know. I just made
he
that
definitely
up.
looked older. Yeah,
he's definitely not a teen.
But it's just funny because they and the teen movies they were thinking of were like the beach blanket bingo type movies, like the Frankie and Annette stuff.
Yep.
And the sci-fi movies were the descendants of the Universal horror, kind of the beginning of the
the atomic
age horror stuff. So great things sometimes come out of this cynical approach to filmmaking. I think where yes, maybe the intentions weren't pure. It's like those dating movies where the guy goes out with the girl on a bet, but then he falls in love with her anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a pretty good observation, actually.
To me, that's kind of this is like the movie equivalent of that, where you start with these intentions of lining your pockets and you create something that people actually find sacred, which
that's
I think
a good point.
Is super deep.
Yeah, that is actually that's much better than anything I could come up with.
I doubt it. Waters run deep. Still waters
That's
run
true.
deep. So you got Packanack Lake Region Counselor Training Center does not run off of the mouth as easily. That's a weird way of saying that.
Just say Camp Blood.
So we might refer to it as Camp Blood throughout.
Sure, even though it's not.
Right. There are moments where they cross over into that area in the movie. But then you switch over, okay. I almost think of these as West Coast, East Coast, where the nightmare movies are, and I'm not talking about just setting, because in the first movie, Springwood is Ohio. That is the lore now. But when you watch A Nightmare on Elm Street, Springwood, they never say where it is, but there are palm trees everywhere.
Oh, you're right. I was going to say, it's like, it's almost like The Simpsons,
Yeah, it is.
It's like Springfield, where it's just make it look like anyone's hometown.
And they don't really try that hard. Like, at least in Halloween, where they filmed it in Pasadena, filling in for Illinois?
Yeah.
At least the palm trees were usually just off in the distance where there's nothing they could do about it back then. And in Nightmare on Elm Street, they never make any allusions to the setting being in Ohio.
That's true.
But all of the visual cues throughout the movie are blatantly, this is California.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I feel like just for authenticity, like if I were giving points, I feel like the setting is more realized in Friday the 13th Part 2.
Oh, I agree with that. I'd agree with that.
I think the difference is that Friday the 13th had the advantage of the first film. They had a mythology that was really based around the location and not really necessarily around the character. Because without the lake, and you never have Jason drowning. That's a
good point.
Like, the camp is integral to that. On the flip side, Springwood, right? You have the thing that connects everybody is a notorious killer who
is dreaming.
Who the town rallied together to
murder.
To murder. They got private justice, as they would say in Silver Bullet.
Yeah.
They burn him up.
Yeah, that's actually a solid point. I'm sorry.
No, but
you're dropping some great ideas. I'm like, yeah.
Well, to me, like, I always think of like stories, like every stories and songs and all that art. Everything has like a what we consider like an accepted structure, right? When we look at them, so songs you have verses and choruses. In art, you have composition. Things are expected to be there in certain places and at certain times. And I feel like with horror movies, setting, to me, is the thing usually that will push a movie from the realm of me liking it into the realm of me loving it.
I agree with that. I mean, you've helped me discover that, honestly, just through our years of podcasting together. I remember you mentioning the first Evil Dead.
Yeah.
And how you were like, God, that was a long time ago. You talking about the same thing.
The cabin.
And how the cabin's a character.
Yeah, that sounds so pretentious when you call like a setting a character.
But it is true.
It is true. Like it's hard to, but also like, I think sometimes when people call like Sex and the City's notorious for calling New York City the fifth character or whatever.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
And I feel like setting is always a character. Really, it's not always treated with the respect that a character gets. But I think like the only way to tell a great story, and especially in film, I think to really drive it home is the setting has to be treated with the same respect that a character is. I do think that Springwood gets there throughout the series, but I think that they didn't have the edge in the beginning. Oh, really? Yeah.
Well, I haven't watched the Nightmare movies in a long time.
See, they do.
So that's where this is going to get very interesting.
Yeah, because Springwood, becomes more important to the storyline.
That's true. Okay. You're right. I do remember that now.
Where they do the reverse with
That's true.
with the Friday series. Yeah.
Well, look again, not to jump ahead, but you're right. I mean, how many movies can you do in a franchise that tie him to a lake?
Right.
The answer to that is 12. So,
yeah, because then they
do 8 technically.
And when we get to the other movies, they take that character and they're like, wouldn't it be fun if we moved this killer to this location? Where the Nightmare series, the thing about that setting of that one, for me is it's the town is very much like Stephen King's It, where the town itself is evil.
Yeah.
There's problems there wherein like clearly there's corruption that runs into every family. It kind of has that same vibe of like a lot of these gritty reboots of like Archie and like the Riverdale type stuff.
Yes, the Riverdale Twin Peaks show.
Yeah, yeah. And I love, to me, that gives you a richer palette to work with.
It goes to what you were just saying about the setting.
Yeah. So any other things you want to say about either one of the settings of these?
No, I didn't give much thought to the settings, if I'm going to be honest, but I will in the future.
I forced myself, and I was telling you this before we started recording, like I've seen all of these movies a minimum of like 4 times each, a minimum. I mean,
yes, when you're a horror fan and you're in horror like you and I are, they're just on at some point.
Yeah, and you kind of also want to. I love the idea of checking back in on the movies I love in a way where what I was thinking about with this podcast in particular is looking at these movies as individual movies.
Yes.
First,
I'm trying that.
That's the main thing. And
it's very hard to do, again, as a longtime horror fan. We've been watching these movies for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
You know, it is fun and difficult, though, to watch, like, just erase everything you know.
Yeah, and to come
go
in.
From there.
Yeah, so my question is, once you arrive at these settings in these movies, is do they work as a standalone movie? Is one of the things I was kind of thinking about. So talk about like the origins, right?
Yes.
The origin of, we'll start with Friday the 13th. I feel like I'm doing all the talking. You go for it.
Well, this is, I'm going to completely contradict what you just said about watching these as individual movies. Because part 2, it's hard to say it's impossible because they do that very long recap.
Yeah.
Of the first one. It's like, what? Probably like 7 minutes
at least
worth of like recap.
It's like a previously on when you watch the start of a new TV
I was
series.
watching it today and I was like, how long is this recap? Like, so it's tough to watch Friday the 13th individually, but also, and it kind of goes to what I was saying before, when you watch these as just movies and take out the long love, that's where you, especially with part 2, it does go like, what the hell is happening in this movie, technically? Like, and I think I've said this on HorrorHound Radio. I love Friday the 13th, again, to reestablish my all-time favorite horror franchise. But what's the plot of Friday the 13th? Did Jason drown?
We had this discussion, me and Amy. It's the discussion I think every fan of the series likes to have. I think some people have a hard and fast idea of what they consider to be the right answer to this. But I like that it's always a moving target.
It's always moving. Yes, it's always changing.
It's more interesting. Like,
and if you go by this, they never really establish fully.
Well, there is
that scene when he's sitting around the campfire, Paul, right?
Yeah. Well, when we get to
not to jump ahead.
Well, no, that's okay. But when we get into Harbingers, I want to talk about Paul telling the campfire tale because both of these movies have 2 Harbinger scenes.
That's true.
So like, which nowadays a lot of times one is enough, but like I like that both of these bring it up twice, and they're both slightly different takes on what's happening because one person has more information than the other one.
Here's the actual lines of dialogue that Paul says in his campfire exposition scene. I'm bumping shit all over here.
That's okay. This is relaxed. Hi, y'all.
Yeah, this is relaxed.
I'm looking at the Amazon toy catalog and circling things I want Jason to buy for me.
All right, here we go. I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason. His body was never recovered from the lake after he drowned, and if you listen to some of the old-timers in town, they'll tell you he's still out there. Some sort of demented creature surviving off the wilderness, full-grown by now, stalking, stealing what he needs, living off the wild animals and vegetation. Some folks claim they have seen him, right here in this area. The girl that survived that night at Camp Blood, that Friday the 13th, she claimed she saw him. She disappeared 2 months later, vanished. Blood was everywhere. No one knows what happened to her. Legend has it that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night and took his revenge. A revenge that he'll continue to seek if anyone ever enters his wilderness again. And by now, I guess you all know, we're the first to return here. 5 years. 5 long years he's been dormant, and he's hungry. Jason's out there, watching, always on the prowl for intruders, waiting to kill, waiting to devour, thirsty for young blood.
Fisher-Price Little People should make a
Fisher-Price Little People should make a Camp Blood playset. But again, in this, they say that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night. But also, the thing that I was, again, watching it kind of with a clear head is a timeline. Now, they do say 5 years passed in between the first and the second.
Yeah.
Which even to me is still like, that doesn't make any sense. Because Jason's a child at the end of part 1.
Was he still a child?
But that's, again, did he actually come out of the water in part 1 or was it?
Yeah. Because, well, the thing is, at the end, and I feel like, Amy and I had this discussion, I always felt that was a dream.
I don't know.
At the end of part 1, when the young Jason comes up out of the water and grabs I
can't remember her name for the
Annie?
life of me.
It's Alice.
Alice.
When Alice is, because then she wakes up.
Yeah, and she says, so then he's still out there.
Yeah, there was no boy. Yeah, he's.
But
still
then
out
because
there.
then going by logic, we didn't watch the first one, but at the end of the first one, she's in the canoe.
Yeah,
she's running her hand in the water. Little Jason pops out, grabs her, and pulls her under.
Well, let's go on the presumption.
But then the cop says,
yeah,
my men pulled you out of a canoe, right? Like,
yeah.
So theoretically, that didn't happen. Right.
She fell asleep in the canoe and dreamed that, is what I always felt.
But then if you watch part 2.
Well, when you watch part 2, there's so many, part of this is like, can you trust?
God, this is a horrible movie. No, that's a joke.
Well, when this comes to when we get to the point of whether or not these stand alone as a movie, I think in a way it does. If you just watch part 2 and you've never seen another Friday the 13th and you get that set up.
Yes, it does work.
You see like a 10, maybe 11-year-old boy, give or take, and it's 5 years later. So we're looking
16,
at
17.
a teenager, but we're also looking at someone who is suffering from at least one deformity and possibly others. He could just be
pulling a Michael Berryman.
He could just be a giant.
Could be
kid.
Yeah.
And if you just took this and carved it out of the whole series and never looked at any other movie in the series and just say, this is Friday the 13th.
Okay.
The setup is that a teenage boy who witnessed the murder of his mother.
This movie does establish its own. Yes, I see what you're saying.
It has internal logic.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're right. It does. It completely encapsulates and cut that.
Encapsulates.
Yes.
I will not. I will also.
It completely, yes. It is self-contained when you break it down like that.
So he leaves as a teenager. So for 5 years, he's been hanging out in the abandoned, condemned Camp Blood in his little shack
that he made.
That apparently he made out of garbage.
Which he did a great job.
Yeah, not bad.
I looked at that today and I was like, I don't think I could do that.
So the bigger question that pops up for me around the origin with Jason is, if he drowned, did he die?
Yes. That's the argument. Where it's like
they never say.
They do not. Because again, it goes to that logic where it's like, if you sit down and break it down like we're doing, what was her motivation in the first one? If he didn't drown.
Oh, you mean Betsy Palmer's character? Yeah.
What was Mrs. Voorhees? If he didn't drown,
Well, maybe
was she just upset that they were ignoring him and that he almost drowned?
I think that it could be that he had to be revived. There could be a missing piece. But this goes back to
You think they could have just added one line of dialogue?
I'm glad they didn't.
Like she pulled him out and revived him.
So what?
There we go. We just wrote a better thing.
There it is. Well, if we work on the assumption that part 1 and part 2 at this point exist in a realm of reality, right?
Okay.
So we can forget part 1 and just think of part 2 because you get all of that front loaded at the beginning of the movie before the real story starts. So if this is a realistic story, then he had to have survived the drowning.
Yes.
People do not come back from the dead.
No.
So he survived the drowning. And I don't know how long ago, from Mrs. Voorhees' perspective as she's giving this speech, I'm trying to remember the opening of part 1 where it says Camp Crystal Lake, like blah, 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 and has the date. Did it say like the 50s?
It was the 50s.
So but they don't do that in part 2. So if we're looking at this as a standalone movie, we can't take into account that this happened 30 years or 20 years prior to.
Yeah, this is all messed up.
Right. The timeline, it's continuity wise, there's a problem.
Yeah.
But again, that's why it's a great fairy tale and like.
Sure.
The continuity flaws make the franchises more interesting.
Well, I don't disagree with that, because I was going to say one of the things that make Friday the 13th one of my favorite franchises, period, is, to me, it is the definition of shut your brain off.
Yeah.
And just watch a slasher movie.
Or fill in the blanks with your imagination.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is I...
Like, and again, not to derail the entire podcast, but if someone were to ask me details, I'd be like, who cares?
Well, there's that, but then there's also... When you say shut your brain off, maybe only shut off the logical part of your brain and be a kid again.
That's what it is.
And to me, that's like where the most fun comes in. And it's why I think I love things like Mr. Show and The Mighty Boosh. Like, they do not put reins on the imagination. Shit will happen that would never happen in real life. And it's just a reminder that you're in a fantasy.
Sure.
I like that.
I don't disagree with that.
I like to be reminded that like anything's possible in a movie.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that make you love movies.
Yeah. And for Jason to have been both, which is it could be a multiverse thing as the way comics
that's what it is.
Address it.
It's a comic book. It's the multiverse.
Yeah.
There's a portal at the bottom of the lake.
So his origin is evolving, right?
Yes.
And you get that they needed a killer. And I do feel like in part 2, it was just a matter of following through on the cynical proposition of making money.
Oh, 100%.
And they needed a killer, and they killed their killer off at the end of the first movie. So they're like, well, what's the next logical killer? They're like, well, what about the son? They're like, well, the son's dead. He drowned 50 years ago.
I know you said you don't want to get too much behind the scenes, but
yeah,
if you watch some of the stuff, that's why Tom Savini talks about how he didn't come back for part 2, because he said, but there is no part 2.
Right.
And when they pitched him an idea, he said, like, that's stupid. Like, the son's dead. That's the whole point.
That's so funny that you said that. Because, I mean, it's like, it's genius, though, in a way, because where a person who demands reality and believability would have stepped in, we never would have had the Friday the 13th series if someone had insisted on the killer being like one of the counselors.
Sure.
Or, you know what I mean? The fact that
an ant.
Yeah. So that's where the credit actually, I think, comes in for it being more than a body count movie, although it keeps both movies, right? 13 in each, I think.
Is there that many Nightmare on Elm Street? No, there's only 12.
I meant
there's only 12 Friday the 13th movies.
Friday the 13th, 1 and 2. I meant number of kills in each.
Oh, okay. You're talking about kills.
Well, I know of 10 that I counted myself in when we get to kills for Friday the 13th or 2. And Nightmare on Elm Street is much lower. But so that's the Jason origin. And again, like I said, that's continuing to evolve throughout the franchise.
Every entry, actually, when you say it.
Yeah, you get a little more.
Yeah.
And then with Freddy, though, what you get is this fully formed character from go, right?
Yes.
Like, sure, his personality changes as the series goes, but the origin of the character is very, very clear cut. in the first film. And also, it's kept a secret until the switch from the second to the third act.
See, now that is something that I really paid attention to watching Nightmare on Elm Street this time. Now, I will go on record. Friday the 13th, and not to start the debate, probably my least favorite franchise of horror.
You mean Nightmare?
Nightmare, yes. Yes, Nightmare. I don't know what it is. It never grabbed me.
You had a Radio HorrorHound moment?
I did have a Radio HorrorHound moment. But watching it this time, it was like, wow, they don't give you much about Freddy. Like, he says his name early on. He says, come to Freddy.
Yeah.
You know, that's the first time you hear it. But then, like you said, like, it's not till late in the movie that you actually get his origin and you realize how much of a kind of a backdrop he is in the first movie. You know, like, he's a monster. You know, he's, yes, cracking jokes and being Freddy, but nowhere near what they do later on. Doesn't have a ton of dialogue. You know, his dialogue is just meant to torment and stuff like that. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah. It's not,
Nancy. It's Nancy Central.
Yeah.
Like,
she's when we get into heroes too, I think the difference is kind of striking between Jenny and Nancy when we get into that. But like, I think that with as you're exposed to Nancy, who's kind of the good girl who is helping a friend who's afraid to sleep because her parents are out of town.
It's like, great little story.
It's a good setup, and also she's the good girl. They set up that she's like, we're here for her tonight.
I loved the way the movie progresses in that.
Yeah.
Like, and obviously it's a Wes Craven. Wes Craven was a genius when it comes to it. But, you know, how it starts with like a nightmare, you know, and then you just you hear all the other characters slowly saying like, I had the same dream. Yeah. Like, I love that little buildup. Like how everyone like had the same dream, but they're not telling each other until it gets further and further crazier.
So you get into harbingers, right? So you have that happen in Friday the 13th with Crazy Ralph.
Crazy Ralph.
You get him first, and he's like, yo, what's the line?
You're doomed. You're all doomed. I told the others.
So Crazy Ralph, you get him, but then you get a reinforcement before the second act starts with Paul's campfire tale version of it.
Yep. Which they play later on in other movies also. Yeah. They go back to that.
It's a great moment.
It is.
But then you have...
Wow, is that like... That's like, to me, I'm sorry to interrupt, like...
It's all right.
To me, that's like such almost a horror movie trope. Like that type of scene.
The campfire tale?
The campfire tale.
Oh, I love it.
Is this the first one, maybe?
Oh, my. You know what? This was before The Fog, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Because the other big one I always think of is
The Fog.
It's The Fog. I don't know. It'd be worth looking up.
Yeah,
maybe we can figure it out. Homework for next time.
That's right.
That was the first campfire tale in a horror film.
I'll say horror film.
In a horror
film.
Yeah, because I mean the old westerns always have.
Of course.
And then you flip. Okay, we were talking about like that Crazy Ralph and Paul's campfire tale and Nightmare. I mean, in Friday.
We're going to do that a lot.
We are going to do that a lot. And then you go over to Nightmare and you have Tina is the Harbinger character. At first, you think she's maybe the main character because she has the nightmare, but all horror directors love Psycho, right? So they always like to throw somebody at you who you identify with that they can kill, right? So you get Tina. Tina has this nightmare, and then she turns into the Harbinger during the sleepover scene where she's having the discussion with Nancy and I have the same dream.
Oh, you're right.
Later, you get the same, and they happen in similar spots, right? Like if you look at the time code on both these movies, like you get Crazy Ralph warning the kids around the same time.
Pretty early.
Tina.
Yeah.
And then you get Paul's campfire tale and Nightmare. I mean, Friday the 13th. That's around the same time that Nancy visits Rod in jail. And he gives the second Harbinger speech about his encounter with Freddy and how, you know, they take the threat, they establish it, and then they double down before the third act starts in both movies. And I'm curious to see if they bother us when we get into the other movies. I'm trying to, you know, I'm not even going to try to remember. I'm just going to experience it when it happens. But I feel like that is so effective in both movies, I feel like that is now, to me, that kind of belongs in what I expect
100%
from a good
yes.
slasher movie.
Yes, absolutely. That's a must.
Yeah, you got to have the mythology. They have to be larger than life.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to reinforce it.
I mean, yeah, not to hit the nail too hard on the head, but again, he's speaking directly to the audience, or both of them are technically.
Yeah.
But more so Paul in that scene, because it's like, zooming in closer and closer to him.
Yeah.
So that he is speaking directly to us. I
will say that something visually, just from the cinematography standpoint and the film stock maybe, and the lighting, I do think that Friday the 13th Part 2 had the edge, especially
I'll agree with that.
In the campfire scene. If you put Rod's jail cell scene with Nancy up against the campfire scene and you take all the sound out and you're only thinking about the way the two of them look, I do think like in Friday, you get a much more interesting thing to look at. You have all the counselors around the fire, so you get all your characters kind of in a way being reinforced.
My counter argument to that would be, one of the things I love about horror movies in particular, when you do break them down, is when you have a director try to recreate normal life. Kind of like what we were saying about Springwood. Springwood?
Springwood.
That it looks like every town.
Yeah.
And the thing I liked about the scene with Tina and Nancy is
Tina and Nancy
in Nightmare.
Yeah, do you mean in
the Harbinger scene?
The parents' house scene.
Yes.
Okay.
When Tina's doing that, he's doing a good job of recreating like a scene from everyone's type of childhood or something, of just you and your friends hanging out at a sleepover.
Yeah.
That's the stuff I love, is everyone should be able to relate to that on some level. Parents are out of town.
Supremely spooky.
Yes. Parents are out of town. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it goes to what I've always said mostly about the Friday the 13th franchise is, when you get to the basic slasher tropes of sex, parties. I was like, yeah, because the whole point of these is to make you having a good time and then put you in absolute terror. Yeah. You know what I mean? Oh, you're having sex and doing drugs and stuff. You're having a great time. Then all of a sudden, all your friends are dead.
I do feel
it's the polar opposite. It's counter.
Like Friday 2 has this more like swinging vibe in the beginning. Whereas when I'm looking at Nightmare.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point.
Nightmare is very dark from
it starts dark.
It starts super dark. Like, I feel, and it's so bizarre and dreamy, that moment where the goat comes out, or the sheep.
Yes.
Which is perfect.
It was a goat.
Yeah. It was perfect. Like, to have that in her dream, like, it works as a metaphor for so many things, but also it just tells you that this isn't reality right from go, because you're in a boiler room. Why is there an animal in here?
Yeah.
So, it's enough of a cue that something's not right. And he keeps you, I think he does a great job, Wes Craven. I mean, like, keeping you off kilter throughout the runtime of that movie by never really feeling that anything is 100% reality. Anything could be a dream.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And this is before anyone had refined that idea in a mainstream movie to where it really worked. And I think that, obviously had a lot of fun as we get into the other movies, like kind of building on that idea. But this first one, I saw this movie when it came out and I was 6, and my parents took me to the theater to see it. So it had a big impact on me.
That makes sense.
Most terrifying. Like, I mean, it was this and Jaws were like two things where I just had nightmares about them after. And, a lot of it has to do with that first sequence with when they first reveal Freddy. And then later when, at the sleepover scene where he's chasing Tina down the alley. But when I was talking about before was like the actual look of those scenes, of the Rod scene where Rod's in the jail cell, Nancy's come to visit him, and he's explaining he didn't kill Tina. This is like the second Harbinger scene. If I'm putting like that up against that campfire scene, like I said, if you cut the sound out and you're just judging it based on what you're seeing, like Friday the 13th, to me, it looks like a big budget film in some moments, and one of them is that. And a lot of it is, this is back in the day, everything's shot on film.
Sure.
It just looked like more thought. Of course, it's hard to compete with a drab-looking jail cell versus this beautiful campfire scene. So there's something inherently like very different about the two scenes. So I'm not trying to say they're apples and apples, because they're two totally different kinds of scenes. But it just struck me because I couldn't help but compare them because they both serve the same function.
I did not put those two together, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. These movies have almost all the same beats.
Kind of. Yeah. You're right. You're absolutely right.
I do think that Friday the 13th 2 is more exciting overall because there's just so much more happening throughout the movie. It just moves constantly. Where Nightmare likes you to kind of stew on things.
And it's interesting you bring that up. And again, not to, I don't know, we don't to lead into anything, but again, watching them and kind of comparing, I realized that I'm more of a fan of the Friday the 13th type kills in the like surprise.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like jump scare for lack of a better term. Like, boom, you're dead. Whereas like Nightmare, like they're giving you the hints, like something bad is about to happen. Like it's
about
a whole like build up.
Yeah.
You know, of like, okay, he's going to die here. Like we know this versus, you know, the Friday the 13th where it's like, oh, it might be a dog jumping out at you or it might be an axe.
You know, that's something else too, is like, I do think they're serving two like horror audience cravings, right? Like,
absolutely.
So that's why I think I love them both so much, and I could watch. They pair really well together. I think you really see the differences between the two franchises when you watch these two movies specifically, Part 2 and the first Nightmare, the Part 2 of Friday and the first Nightmare on Elm Street together, because it's the beginning of these two characters that have become iconic in every household names. But at these two moments, they're both in these moments where it's just a movie still.
Yeah.
And it just being a movie, like Friday the 13th is delivering like excitement.
Yeah.
And it's both sexual excitement, blood and guts, like action.
I was actually about to say that. I always say this about the Friday the 13th franchise in particular. I think it was the first horror franchise to kind of, for lack of a better description, drop the horror and almost make it feel more like action movies.
Yeah.
I could be wrong on some of the later Nightmares if I'm remembering them correctly.
Wait, you're saying that
Friday the 13th, to me, almost some of the later ones feel more like an action movie than they do horror.
Right. It's very much running.
Yes.
And the complaint people made about Hatchet, which to me is like, that serves a purpose. Like it feeds a craving in me, like to see characters being pursued. In Friday the 13th, this formula is they don't know they're being pursued. When they do know they're being pursued, you're in the third act. And then from there, it's running downhill. Friday the 13th, fast pace.
Mm-hmm.
Third act is everybody running from the killer. Whereas I do think the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are a killer where everything builds on dread. You see him coming, but you can't do anything about it.
True.
Until some clever character, when you get to a hero character, finds a way to address that killer on their own terms. Whereas Friday the 13th, you've got this hidden threat that's going to pop out and get you, and it's going to be over in an instant.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the...
Oh, no, you're good.
God damn it. And now it just went away. I mean, that is where... I mean, you said it earlier, and you're 100% right. To me, that almost came from Michael Myers. Like that Freddy Krueger thing of, like, you cannot stop him.
Well, I think he's got more in common with, like, at least from a storytelling, I do think Michael Myers is more of they don't see him coming. He's more like Jason, I think. Whereas, to me, Freddy Krueger is more of like, it's hard to even think of an example. That
is where he is unique.
Well, he's after you. you encounter him several times before he ever hurts you.
True. He torments you.
He torments you. Like, it's a totally different kind of horror to me. Where,
but would he arguably, though, in some of even the early scenes of Nancy dreaming, would he not have killed her if she didn't wake herself up or something else, you know?
It felt like she was just narrowly escaping, right?
A lot of times, like when she burnt herself.
Yeah.
Like it definitely looked like he was coming to kill her.
Yeah.
And then when she was in the sleep institute,
yeah,
you know, and like they're waking her up.
Yeah.
So that is,
It's
I just realized that.
Yeah, it's just like a whole different vibe.
It is.
Like,
well, I mean, that is ultimately, and again, not to repeat what's been said 1,000 times and everything, but that is what makes Freddy so effective, is you cannot escape him because you have to sleep.
Right.
Period. Once you encounter him once, you're screwed.
Yeah. It's like The Ring. I guess The Ring
is kind of like The Ring.
You know, I was trying to think of a more, current example. Not that The Ring is current, but It Follows is a great example. That's current.
True.
More current than The Ring.
Once you experience it.
Yeah. It's about something. It's something inevitable. And I think that's why it serves that great purpose of, like, you know, that rehearsal for death thing that you're supposed to be getting out of horror movies, where it's like Freddy's there to prepare you for cancer or a long illness, and Jason is there to prepare you for sudden accidental death.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Like, to me, they feel like the two sides of that same fear coin, you know?
Wow, that's good. I like that, Freddy.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm going to be sitting on that one.
See, Freddy and Jason.
Now I'm going to watch these movies terrified of cancer and getting hit by a car.
Because it's all subconscious stuff. It's like Freddy represents, like, to me, in my imagination, like, it is stuff that's happening inside of you that you can't control. And Jason represents things that's happening outside of you that you can't control. You know, and it's like, that's why I think they last forever.
On the more direct one, you know, you think about what all horror movies, not all, but a lot of horror movies do, and that is the distrust of adults. You know, and especially when you get to, like, parent. You know what I mean? Like, it's an ultimate betrayal. Now I'm being hunted by someone that my parents murdered. You know, like, I'm paying for their sins.
What a great reveal that is. Like, talking about, you know, we're jumping around categories, but that's okay. Like, the background.
Yeah.
When you get to the reveal when Mom, Marge, Ronnie Black, right?
But she does so great.
She is great.
She is great in this movie.
Yeah. Her and John Saxon both.
I love John Saxon and everything. I got to meet him, and it was such a fanboy moment.
I love Enter the Dragon.
I had him sign my Enter the Dragon poster.
So cool. But Marge is starting to understand that Nancy is dreaming about this person that she helped murder. And,
I love that scene at Rod's funeral.
Yeah.
You know, like when she's getting in the car and she's like slowly describing, and like they look at each other, and like, you know, the dad, John Saxon, kind of like, all right, get in the car. Like,
that's a great moment. And
it is great.
I think that in a casual viewing of this, I gloss over that stuff because I'm so used to the backstory of Freddy Krueger, and I've seen him so many times. I don't appreciate the small moments in the movie. I do now that I really intensely watched it. That funeral sequence has a number of really interesting, quiet moments where, like, you kind of see who Rod's parents are. I never noticed.
Yeah, and you know, it is a sad scene. And, like, again, watching it this time, watching it kind of with different eyes, you realize how much of a, if I guess for lack of a better term, tragic character Rod is.
Yeah.
And that he's a victim in this.
Yeah, he's wrong place, wrong time.
Like, he's kind of deep down not a bad guy, you know? Like, he's upset at himself for not saving his girlfriend.
He's got a reputation.
But there are scenes where he's, like, even almost on the verge of tears when he said, like, I could have saved her.
Yeah.
You know, and stuff like that. And then, like, even at his fucking funeral, he's being accused of murdering her. When the priest says, those who live by the sword shall die by the sword, you know, then it's like, this poor kid.
Yeah. And the parents, I assume the parents, they never say, but that's why I like that scene, because of the glance they send back to John Saxon's the sheriff character. They look at him like, this is your fault.
Yeah.
And it brings some reality into the movie where, again, you never know what's real 100% of the time because they set you up with that first nightmare sequence. So everything after that, you're like, well, it's sunny out. There are palm trees. Maybe it's a dream because it's Ohio and it has palm trees. No, but
a goat just walked by.
Yeah. But like, those moments of those quiet glances between the adults tell you you're in reality, I think, in those scenes. And then to bring it back around to that moment that they share in the car ride where they look at each other that she knows.
Oh, yeah.
And she has silently made the decision, to tell her everything.
And then, not to sound corny, I've said this before, I'm a parent. And I did watch this differently as a parent, over the years as I did as a kid, looking into a parent's perspective of like, how fucking terrifying would that be? God forbid. I've never cornered a man and burnt him alive.
You should write an article for HorrorHound about when is the right time to show your children.
Oh, I used to have a list.
The weapon that you have stored in the furnace.
Back in the furnace. There you go, Hank and Emily. Here you go. It's the axe that the old hatchet man.
Here it is.
But it is different watching it like that, where again, like those little glances, or it's like, oh shit.
Yeah. I would love to see someone. Some fan may already made this movie, but I would like to see like a legit movie retelling of a prequel almost, where the first act is the parents taking revenge on Freddy Krueger and killing him, and then the second and third acts are them trying to cope with all their children being murdered in their dreams, but you never see the nightmares. You just see the aftermath of everything. And then trying to figure it out. It would be really sad. And also it would lack all of the spectacle of all the other nightmare movies, and fans would hate it. But as a drama piece, I think like also it would be incredibly chilling, like Glenn's parents, right? Them just coming into his room and there's just soup.
That is that scene's weird to me. And again, not to bounce all over, I see you have a kills category here.
Oh yeah, we can get into kills now if you want.
Sure, let's start the kills.
Okay, Friday the 13th Part 2. I counted 10. I did not go online to verify this, but a quick rundown is Alice kills Mrs. Voorhees with a machete in the flashback. The rest of the kills are all Jason. He kills Alice with the ice pick, Crazy Ralph by strangulation, kills the sheriff with the claw hammer, kills Scott with the snare plus the machete. Terry is killed off screen, the only off screen death that I can think of, other than the random animal that I thought was Muffin.
That's a nice little twist.
It's a weird twist.
You don't want Muffin to be dead.
There's a lot of questions that brings up when we get to loose ends. But my favorite kill is Mark with the machete in the face.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
That is, to me, one of the top Friday the 13th kills, period.
I think that kill, again, this show really has no real format, but when I get the best shot in the movie for me.
Oh, 100%.
Rolling down the stairs.
Yep.
Yeah. The thunderstorm, the way he's just,
everything
the lightning
about that
illuminates
scene
him.
Is just perfect.
The freeze frame.
Yes.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
It is.
Then you have Sandra and Jeff with one spear.
Yeah.
Which is a Bava thing, right?
The classic.
From
Twitch of the death nerve.
Which is, I love those scenes. Although I do think Friday the 13th did it better.
Probably, yeah.
And then Vicky with the butcher knife.
That one's weird. That's a weird kill.
It's hard to even, in my mind, to remember exactly what the whole scenario was. She just found the bodies and then he stabbed her.
Yeah.
Right?
She pulled back the cover and Jason was underneath there. Yeah. And he like pops up because he cuts her leg first.
Yeah, that's right.
Because then she's like backing up. And again, like when you really, if you're going to analyze these films, it is like, God, you're watching this poor teenager beg for her life as she's getting backed into a corner with a butcher knife.
Yeah.
But then her death scene is also kind of comical because the actress arguably.
She actually was pretty funny, like in all of her performance. Like, because she's the one who's trying to get with Mark before he takes the machete to the face. She has this moment where she goes and she is ramped up. She's hot to trot, man, as they would say back then. To go. And it's a great sequence. I feel bad she didn't get what she wanted before she got
that is like
stabbed. Not real fair. Not real fair. Nightmare on Elm Street, I only counted 4 kills, but they all but one happened twice. When you think about it. Because you get Freddy kills Tina right off the bat, then Rod, then Glenn, then Marge. Then Nancy brings everybody back. And he turns around and kills everybody but Nancy again. See,
now it's funny you bring that up. And again, like you said, we don't really have a format for this. This could, to me, unless you can correct it, would almost fall into the loose ends category.
Yeah, it does.
It goes into what we were just saying about Friday the 13th, 1 to 2. What is the ending of this movie, of Nightmare on Elm Street?
You know what?
Because I used to mock the ending in that I used to say Freddy was like the easiest fucking, guy to beat because all you have to do is turn your back to him and say, I'm not giving you any more power.
Yeah.
No! And he falls into nothing.
Yeah. But it was more of him fucking with her.
Was it?
I think so.
Because, I mean, again, trying to watch these individually, we know she survives. We know Nancy survives, but it's like, what the fuck happens at the end of this movie?
Well, the only reason we know Nancy survives is because of part 3.
You're right.
So theoretically, if we're looking at it as a standalone movie, everyone's dead.
That's true. That's a good point.
The presumption would be that Freddy...
Actually, you know what? You're right in that when I saw it for the first time, that was my assumption, was that, everyone's dead. Okay.
Yeah. He took the form of Glenn's car.
Yes.
Which
Very nice car.
The first time we see Freddy blatantly change shapes, right? Because you see it later in the series, like where they expand on that idea of him turning into shit, and especially like in the comics and everything when you get into that. But if you're looking at just this as a standalone movie, he wears Tina's skin at one point.
Yeah.
But at the end, he's a car. and then he's also omnipresent, which is
because he's in the house also.
Yeah, we haven't seen that where he's in 2 places at once at this point.
It's yeah, I mean they really, Wes Craven did make him unbeatable.
Yeah.
If you go by the ending of this movie, really.
Or any of them, really, because he always, it's, they talk about Jason coming back. Freddy never leaves. Jason may come back from the dead, but Freddy is permanent. Like, he's just always exists. It's death, basically. It's like an inevitable thing. So, like, they serve those metaphors where you're only in danger from Jason, like, when he's physically in your presence, right?
Yeah.
So he's just like, like the log truck from Final Destination 2 or 3 or whichever one that was.
2.
Was that 2? That moment, I see him in the same way. When they call him a force of nature, I think that really is appropriate.
Yeah. I look at. No, I guess it does fit a few different killers, people, profile. Because I think about that with Michael Myers too.
Yeah. See, I like the. Oh man, one of these days we're just gonna have to talk about Halloween too.
Yeah, I know.
As this goes on, but
maybe we'll do a sequel to it.
We'll do deep dives. We'll do Michael versus Pinhead.
There you go.
But nobody has the personalities of these two.
Yeah, which is weird because Jason being mute.
Yeah,
but still has very much personality.
He does.
Yeah.
I love the character.
I was going to say, anyway, I'm sorry, the death of Glenn in Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, do you get a more iconic scene? Like, to me, that's right there in the top. Like, again, I've said it before, and I don't want to keep harping on it. Nightmare on Elm Street's not my favorite franchise, but that scene should be in, like, everyone's list as, like, most iconic.
Yeah. Best slasher kill, maybe?
I mean, because it's just, again, it's fucked up.
It's over the top. Well, I love that. We weren't going to do a bunch of behind the scenes stuff at all. This is really about the stories and everything. Mm-hmm. But I like that they recycled that room they used for Tina's death. And they thought, I love the creativity of them being like, you know what else you can do when you turn a room upside down?
Just pour a bunch of shit into it.
Yeah.
And it's so damn effective.
It's scary because also it's not. And as a
because
kid,
it looks so good.
It looks great, but there's also some moments, and again, this is like why I love like Argento movies with a flaw. I like flaws, but sometimes flaws, those mistakes read as something extra to me. Like the fact that his sheets are hanging up into the air as the blood spraying out because of the if they get wet,
Oh, fuck, you're right.
It makes it more dreamy to me. Like, and this whole concept of him crossing over, because the parents clearly see something happen in this room that's not possible.
That's a hard scene in that when I was watching it today, it was like when the mom opens the door and I think the mom could have had a better reaction. If that makes any sense.
Like got a mop or something?
Yeah, like, God damn it. No, like
Bounty, the quicker.
But I guess that's the point. It's like, how the fuck how do you react to that?
I want to see a commercial for paper towels where it's Glenn's room and the mom comes in, drops one little sheet, and it soaks everything up.
Look at that.
And then she puts it in the bin.
So long, Glenn.
Glenn's in the bin.
Oh,
it was easy thanks to Bounty or Sparkle.
Yeah, that scene just really got me again for some reason today watching it.
It's brutal, like, because it's happening where he's supposed to be safe up in his room.
Yep.
His parents clearly care about him.
Oh, yeah.
The dad so much that he kind of comes off as an asshole when you're a kid watching it and you realize, like,
that's a dad.
Somebody who seems mentally ill is calling my son over and over again, screaming into the phone. I'm not going to bother my son with this. It makes sense. Thanks. Yeah.
Can we talk about a weird observation? That Glenn is laying on his bed with a television on his lap.
Yeah.
Like, people our age, those TVs weren't light.
No, they were super heavy.
They were friggin' heavy, and they produced heat.
You know what his motivation for having it in his lap was?
Miss Nude.
That's right. You got to put it in your lap.
That's true.
And wear headphones if you're going to watch. Which also, when I was a kid, always blew my mind that he's using like what looks like the TV in Springwood is very different from TV in real life in 1984.
Yeah.
One, over-air antenna, we did not have Ms. Nude USA or whatever it was.
No.
And we didn't have Evil Dead, which Nancy's watching in her bedroom. Like, the TV that exists in this world is very different. It almost feels like they're in the RoboCop universe.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it, I think those really bizarre little moments too, I think color later installments when we get into it about the world building of what Springwood is and how it is not a real place. Like, it is very cartoonish.
Yeah, that's true. Evil Dead and Miss Nude USA.
Yeah. As far as quantity, about approximately half the amount of kills in Nightmare on Elm Street. However,
quality.
Each one is pretty creative. Tina in particular was really horrifying the first time I saw it.
Oh, it is absolutely horrifying.
So much blood.
Yeah.
And the way she is screaming. Yeah. That made it stand out because I think this might have been probably one of my first horror movies that I saw was this first one. I don't think I had seen any of the Friday the 13th yet. But in hindsight, looking at that scene, I think it's shocking how much they let her suffer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other slashers at the time didn't really do that.
Yep. Again, it goes to the machete to the face. Boom, you're dead. All of the Friday the 13th kills, when you look at it, are relatively quick.
Yeah.
You might have a brief scene of like, oh no.
Yeah. Jason's not a sadist.
But this, yes.
Yeah.
And like, to me, like the scene, and again, even if you want to go to Rod, like he hangs him.
Yeah.
Like hanging isn't, a quick death.
No. And it's
especially in this one. But like with Tina, like to me, like the reaching gets me. Like when they're like reaching for each other, like that's horrific.
Yeah.
Again, it goes to like almost like torture.
That scene with a tooth. I think it's a tooth, and I think like most of the people I've talked to think it's a tooth, where she's in the dream when Tina first is in the dream and Rod's in the bed and she hears something hit the window and she goes to the window and then
it's broken.
It's cracking. But if you look in the very center,
there's a tooth?
It looks like a wisdom tooth, maybe.
Oh, I'm going to have to rewatch that.
It's really strange. And it's another one of those, I've
never paid attention to that.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's moments, the cues throughout the movie that something's a dream and versus reality. And how, when you get into Act 3 and a little before that, it's almost like when Nancy has her first tussle with Freddy, and you see the feather go out the window.
Yeah.
It feels like something happened where suddenly it didn't matter what was real and what was a dream, that the internal rules and logic were like kind of thrown out, because there's no explaining Glenn's death, where it seems like you can explain away Rod's.
Yes, exactly.
You can even explain away Tina's if you think Rod did it.
Well, it does go into the, again, the simpler observation would be it goes into like, with God, what the hell is John Saxon's character's name? I think he's just called like Dad or something.
I always forget.
Anyway, Lieutenant, right? He's a lieutenant.
He's a lieutenant. Yeah, they call him the lieutenant.
Lieutenant
quite often.
But it does go to a level of like you can't deny anymore. Something weird is happening, because that's not again a hanging or a slashing.
Lieutenant Thompson. His name is Lieutenant. His first name is he's Lieutenant LT Smash.
But yeah, it does go to a certain level of like, oh, now I have to accept that this is supernatural, because this doesn't make any damn sense.
Yeah, and even then, man, it's a strange ass movie, really. As a
really
standalone movie, it's really weird.
And I'm going to reiterate, watching it this time, I got that. Like, this is a weird movie. Like, made me just feel weird.
It's weird because you also think of, in hindsight, you have all the branding still in your head of Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy Krueger, and you forget, like, it'd be like if somebody made 10 sequels to the Babadook wouldn't seem so exotic anymore.
Babadook's, turning into a car.
Right, yeah, but I do love these franchises, both of them. And I'm really looking forward to getting into the rest of them.
Yeah, maybe this will give me a new appreciation for the Nightmare movies. And I let me stress this.
Yeah.
I respect the movies, and I respect Freddy. There's no denying that. Freddy Krueger was the icon of horror in the 80s. There weren't no debating that.
Yeah.
Like, he made horror a household name.
Yeah.
Like you said, the house that Freddy built. It was New Line Cinemas. So maybe this will give me a new appreciation, because Freddy never scared me as a kid. Now, granted, I never saw these as a young child. I saw the Friday movies first.
Do you remember about how old you were when you started watching
Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street?
Friday the 13th.
I mean, I started watching horror later, but like I was always be in its presence.
Yeah. So you probably caught glimpses of it.
I caught glimpses of it. I mean, I was older when I saw Nightmare on Elm Street. I was probably like 14, 13. Yeah. So I was probably like 11 or 12 with Friday the 13th.
It's so funny. Like, I don't know if I had a child, I don't know that I would do what my parents did, but at the same time, I can't imagine my childhood without these special moments of going to the movies with my parents and seeing horror movies. Like, they were like, Disney, I guess.
I've had these discussions on the podcast we've done and with other people. When it came to my kids, it was like, when they got around the age of like 12, 13, I was still very strict on what they were watching.
Yeah.
And I think it was around 13, 14 that I was like, you know what? At that age, I was watching some pretty fucked up shit. Like, to put it bluntly, like, and here I am, like, kind of guarding them. Like, I literally had a list on my DVD shelf of here's the movies you're not allowed to watch, which of course just made them want to watch it more.
Yeah.
Thankfully, like, now that they're grown, they told me they didn't.
Like, Atlas shrugged. Scrap that off.
Sure.
There.
Yep. So I don't know. It's tough. I mean, I took the kids to see horror movies. Now, granted, depends on what your level is. I mean, I was taking them to see like Insidious.
Yeah.
And The Conjuring and stuff.
Which are like fantasy. Like, yeah. I almost feel, like the difference between like realistic violence and like supernatural stuff. I do feel that there's probably,
but that's the mix of Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
It's a mixture of supernatural and horrific.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I guess know your kids, right? Is the moral of the story. Like,
also talk.
You probably know when they're ready.
Talk to the kids. And
I don't have any experience with this, so I can't really say. I just have been on the other end of it. And one of my, that's some of my happiest memories.
It goes to what you used to know. I didn't go to theaters to see them.
Yeah.
But my parents were pretty loosey-goosey when it came to renting me stuff. And especially like my aunts, when I'd stay over at my cousin's house and stuff like that, there were no limits to that. I mean, My one aunt, I won't name names, but my one aunt would rent us Faces of Death.
We used to seek that out in like middle school and high school.
It was so rare to find that at some place that actually carried it.
Yeah, it was always like a mom and pop video store.
It was never like a network video.
My first experiences though with really like hardcore, what I considered at the time, if you look at it, this was kind of the hardest of core of horrors, was seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street and Demons both at Northgate Cinemas. Like with that, they might have even been the same year. I'm not sure, but I was little for both of them. I was like first grade maybe. And like both of them, I can go back to them and I always get this really warm, like awesome feeling. Because I remember, I think part of it is coming home from those movies and being afraid to even go into my bedroom and having to reach around the corner to turn the light on and everything. Yeah. And knowing that like mom and dad had my back. You know what I mean? Like that kind of feeling of it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because mom and dad got my back if Jason or Freddy's in there or whatever, the demons are in there. Like, so in a way, I think it was good for me. Like,
I think you turned out to be a pretty good guy.
Okay, thank you. Because I always wonder, like, am something broken inside because of all that? Because I couldn't know. I couldn't know any different.
Yeah,
can't live a different life.
Out okay.
Okay. Best shot nightmare for me. Tina in the classroom doorway during the sequence where the classmates reading.
Yes, I actually.
The dream
it's funny you say that because that is the one that stood out to me also, where it was like. Again, it kind of goes to what we said, uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Where it was like, first off, no one wants to be in school again. But that scene to me, like that was the one where I was like, oh, this is fucked up.
It's so spooky because not just the visual of it, where, I do think like there's something really effective about that scene with Mark going down the stairs. But in this,
go ahead.
It is the most nightmarish thing. To imagine, you're in class and the stoner dude who gets up to read.
Yes.
And as she does,
that's what I was going to say is that it goes to what I said about the earlier scene at the sleepover is that everyone can relate to that scene. I don't care who you are. You've been in school. Everyone can relate to that where someone's reading something and your mind's just drifting completely. And then like when you really realize what's happening in the movie.
Yeah.
It is like, what the fuck? Like
in her first cue, it's always that moment where he marks the crossover from the dream, right?
Yeah.
From reality to the dream. And when the dude up there just starts reciting that in that low whisper.
Yeah.
And the way it works with the score, the moments of the score bubbling up. And first you get that tight shot of Tina in the doorway. But then the best part is when they pan out and you get basically the entire doorway. It looks like any school USA.
Mm-hmm.
The door you're used to coming in and out of the classroom through right there is your friend in a body bag, a clear body bag. Yeah, with blood
everywhere.
And everything from that sequence, I think, is the best sequence in the movie. But that shot is like, if I had two shots that I would want from these movies, like framed and on the wall, it would be the shot with the lightning and Mark freeze frame coming down the steps. And the one from Nightmare would be this one.
Yeah, I could agree with both of those.
So great.
Yeah.
What did you think of? I think the only things that we've left is talking about the score and the loose ends, unless you can think of anything.
I'm going to be dead honest with you. I've always been very bad at listening to musical scores when it comes to movies.
Right. Well, we can talk about the heroes first. Jenny versus Nancy. Like what kind of
Nancy watching this, I was like, God, she is great. Nancy's great in this. But then so is Jenny.
Jenny's cool. Jenny, it's crazy kind of how they are the two characters who, I guess because you're following them up close and personal, but they are the ones who really seem to notice what's happening around them.
Sure.
It's always the one with their eyes open.
Yeah. Nancy is better as a final girl. She's more iconic.
Well, she's
when
clever.
You think about the last third act where she is just fighting Freddy, when she turns her house into like, Saw.
Yeah.
Like it's like, damn, that's awesome. Like, that's really cool. Whereas Jenny she was just, a good final girl.
She was tough.
Yeah, she was tough.
I mean, like just more, again, it's kind of like you think about things you can plan for, I think Nancy is like using that metaphor again of like the slow illness or whatever. She knows that there's things you can do so she gets the booby traps book. She's like, there's things I can do. I can prepare for this somehow. Whereas Jenny is just fucking thrown in the fire.
Yeah.
Like she's got to find her way out.
Fight or flight.
Yeah. So like they are
But
such different characters.
I did always love Jenny when she does the sweater.
Oh yeah.
And she tricks Jason. I did always like that.
That's thinking on your feet.
That is, because who would have looked at that nasty ass sweater and thought, I'm going to put this on?
She was thinking, and it seems silly, that scene, but then when you think about the conversation she had earlier in the bar, she's been thinking about Jason nonstop.
Yeah.
So it's not like she just sprung to mind. She knew about his relationship with his mom. She pieced together that's her head.
Yeah.
And like she's thinking. So it's like she has a lot going on.
But that goes to a previous topic we talked about. In that scene in the bar when the head counselors are all talking and Ted is drunk, which by the way, I know this has been talked about before, but how did we not get him killed?
Wait, she just asked where he is at the end, right? Is Ted
Ted's the high pitched, like, welcome to God's country.
Oh, never mind. I was thinking of the Paul.
Yes, you're thinking of Paul.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ted's the guy who does that he's a fine character because he stands out, but it's like, could we have gotten a kill?
Yeah, what happens to him?
He just stays at the bar.
That was his story. He
even asked one of the bar people who says, like, is there any other place around here to get drunk? And they say, yeah. And he goes, okay. And that was it. But he's reciting, he says, 2 of our people got picked up today, all because some girl fell asleep in a canoe and had a bad dream. He says that in the movie.
2 of our people got picked up.
Because when they go to Camp Blood, when the 2 people go over to Camp Blood and find the mutilated animal, and the cop brings him back.
Yeah, okay.
He says
That's right.
He literally had, like, you might have to look that up, but he said, like, it's some variation of that, where he says 2 of our people got picked up because, why? Because some girl fell asleep in a canoe and had a bad dream.
It's funny how much is there if you listen.
Well, it goes to what you said on how different characters in these movies have different interpretations of what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so much fun to kind of play with.
Whereas like Ted's that, Paul is kind of more matter-of-factly, like, it's over, it's done, whatever. Then Ginny is like sympathetic, like, and what if?
Yeah.
What if?
Yeah.
I hate Ted though. He was horrible. People always mock Franklin from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I have never had a problem with Franklin.
Poor Franklin. He just got dragged out.
I've never had a problem with him.
I mean, he was irritating, but he was irritated for a reason.
Yeah, he was playing his character well.
Yeah.
Whereas to me, Ted is like, that's the guy that we should be dogpiling on.
Did you feel like they made up for that in future installments? Like somebody mentioned that to them and they're like, oh, you want us to kill annoying people?
That's a good point.
It's like, we'll give you 3 a movie going forward.
Yeah, I know what you're hinting at.
So,
loose ends.
Yeah.
What was your things you had in your head? What happened to Muffin?
Score real quick.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Before loose ends, because I always want to end on loose ends because I think it's the most thought-provoking stuff. But Friday 2, awesome orchestral score, real big movie score, full orchestra. Nightmare, like electronic score. Very different.
Yeah.
Traditional, Friday the 13th Part 2, traditional like themes and stuff. Nightmare has recognizable themes, but there's a lot of noise and stuff they deliberately use in it and weird sounds. I kind of feel like that was maybe a lot of the beginning of like that Charles Bernstein, like some of the
that's a good point.
Weird stuff that sounds not musical, but like what does a pile of snakes sound like in
you're gonna make me pay close attention to this in the future.
It's good. It's like, to me, my favorite horror score of all time is The Fog. But
I already know. Yeah.
Charles Bernstein is this score for this first Nightmare movie is very.
Did he do
much
both of them?
Close to those. No. John Carpenter did Fog.
Duh. I'm an idiot.
But then Harry Manfredini, I believe, did.
Yes, he did Friday.
And so he did. I know he wrote all the original Friday music. I'm not sure. I guess he composed everything for 2 as well. I'm pretty sure he did.
I'm pretty sure.
But the arrangements are really big. It feels like it makes the movie feel bigger. The way it's filmed, everything about it's very much the 80s look.
Yes.
Whereas Nightmare has a much more low budget look to it and feel, but I almost feel like it's creepier because it feels kind of cobbled together at times. You know what I mean? Like, cause there are some bizarre moments in that movie, like especially the end with the mom getting pulled through the glass, but musically, like also it's not trying to imitate other movies at any point. Whereas Friday the 13th Part 2, I feel like is very much like, this is a movie. Movies look like this, and movies sound like this.
You're right on that.
So to me, like that, I mean, they fit what they're doing, because Friday the 13th ostensibly is supposed to be realistic, whereas Nightmare on Elm Street, you don't know if it's real at any given moment. So it makes sense why both movies did each thing. But score wise, I always have to listen for that. I love film scores.
It's something I'm going to have to pay more attention to in the future.
You ever just listen to the albums?
No.
Oh, they're so great.
Never.
It's really an interesting experience to listen to them without watching the movie. Or something else that's fun, if you're a nerd like me, is some DVDs have a score only.
I have done that once or twice.
It's really fun with Tim Burton's Batman.
That's actually, that's so funny you were going to say that. I was going to say the one I would mention would be Batman.
It's a great, well, it's because it stands out. Like, you don't need anything. You don't, when you can take everything out but the score and it's still great.
Yeah, that would be the one. That's so funny you said that. That is the one that I've done that with.
I love that so much. But I would love to do that with these. I just don't know, like, if that's even an option, because I don't know how many scenes they have that are completely unscored and you just be sitting there in silence.
Yeah.
So loose ends.
Okay, so
you have them in front of you there.
If Muffin is Muffin alive, what was the dead animal in the woods?
Because they clearly created something that looked like
Muffin. It could just kind of go to what we've talked about in that they just put it there just to mess with you.
Do you think that maybe they tested it and they're
maybe
like,
that was it? They were like, don't
die?
kill the dog. I always say that about Jason Voorhees. He does not kill kids. Yeah, he does not kill kids.
Under a certain age.
He does not kill animals.
He won't kill anyone under 14. Are different.
If you're a teenager, you're fair game.
Yeah.
But he doesn't kill kids and he doesn't kill animals.
I guess he identifies with the kids more.
Yep. And I think that is like his mental, with the animals. Like, I don't want to, why would I want to hurt an animal?
Right.
Whereas Michael Myers, he's a fucking prick.
Yeah, well, he's sacrificing animals, right? Because you're getting into some cult shit when you get over there. If you take all that
animal,
in.
I have no clue what that animal, because I looked at it today and I was like, they made that look like Muffin.
It looked like Muffin. So to me, it almost feels like they either couldn't figure out how to cut that moment and then just left it in and then added the dog at the end.
Good point.
Or it was a misdirect. And if
it was just a misdirect.
If it was a misdirect, it's a weird, pointless misdirect.
Your other one, though, is a good one.
Yeah, where's Paul?
That goes to, and Friday the 13th is good/bad for this. The mysterious ending.
Yeah.
Of kind of the reoccurring question I've had in this episode. What the fuck happened at the end of this movie? It's the same thing with part 1, where it's like, did Jason jump out of the damn water and grab her? And in this, they kill Jason as, she hits him in the shoulder with the machete. Great shot. They're in the building. They hear something outside. Opens up. That's where it's Muffin. That's where you get that cool shot of, Ginny holding the pitchfork to the camera, which I love.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's next to the Mark going down the stairs. That
great shot of that.
Yeah.
But then Muffin comes in and it's like, oh, okay. And then you get the jump scare of Jason coming through the window, grabbing her, right?
Yeah.
It's her.
Yeah, because he comes right behind her.
He still has the machete in his shoulder.
Yeah.
Scene goes to like white. It fades to white. And she wakes up on a stretcher. So what the fuck happened?
She's asking, where's Paul?
Yeah, nobody she's like screaming, like, where's Paul?
Yeah.
So it is like
what happened?
What the hell happened?
Yeah.
Like, did she hallucinate the very end? Did Paul maybe get killed?
Yeah. Don't you feel like it should have cut to credits with him busting through the window?
Yes. Yes.
If I watch this, I don't know. It's one loose end that.
It's a pretty big loose end.
It's kind of fun to think about. what happened to Paul and to fill it in with my imagination. Like I was saying earlier, I like that, but at the same time, if you look at it as a standalone movie, yeah, he's a big character, and they never come back to it.
When you add in that stipulation of the other main character asking, "Where's Paul?"
and they're like,
Just get in the damn ambulance.
Is Paul the big guy with the machete in his arm? He's fine. He's fine. He's in an urgent care.
Do they show that? I mean, I just watched it. I can't remember. Do they show? They never. All you see is Ginny on the stretcher. You never.
No, I meant Jason. Like if they were bringing.
No, I'm saying, but you never see them like covering Jason's body or anything like that.
I think the presumption, and I guess we'll know when we start part 3, because it's been a while for me, is that he just went back to the woods
with a machete in his shoulder,
stitched himself up like Rambo.
That does go to what you've said, that. Or it could be argued that they did lay the groundwork of supernatural early on. Because you can't survive. Because it's not just a machete in the shoulder.
He was smart to
that
leave
machete
it in.
goes down.
Yeah, she split him
into his chest.
Yeah, split him like a cord of wood.
Yes, like so. It's like the Michael Myers debate.
Yeah,
he took 6 shots.
Which side was it on? I wonder if it matters.
It was on his heart. Yeah, it was on his left side. She hits him here.
She probably didn't get far enough down.
Oh, sure.
He left it in, and
then he heated it up, like you said, like Rambo. He heats it up.
He just heated it up. He stuffed Mom's sweater in there for a bandage.
That is a good question. What happened to Paul?
Yeah, where's Paul? Someone needs to write a novella.
Well, I'm going to give everyone a heads up. There's going to be more questions like this because I know part 3 very well.
I hope he's like Pike from Star Trek, where he shows up in like a box with a light on it.
Later on, me.
He's all messed up from what Jason did to him. That would be awesome.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, loose ends from Nightmare. Obviously, we don't know what happens to them once they drive off screen.
Yeah, it goes to what I've said, where it's like, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. And also what the hell happened with Lieutenant Thompson that after this, like he saw his ex-wife.
They cover that in the future one.
In 3, they kind of mention it, but I think maybe he's just in denial. He acts like it didn't happen, right? When they get to 3. But I guess we'll talk about that in 3.
Well, this will be somewhat good in that we have to like pretend that we remember him.
Yeah.
He's like an alcoholic.
Yeah.
In part 3, right? Or is that even further one?
No, it's 3. When she reunites with him.
Yeah, like he's in a bar. Like,
no
one wants to hear from me.
So I guess that's how he dealt with it. Was he
because that is a pretty big thing. He watched his ex-wife get pulled down into a bed.
Yeah, his skeletal.
Yes.
Yeah, Spirit of Halloween wife.
Like he kind of like someone asked him like, "What happened in here?" And he shuts the door. And that's kind of like it. That he leaves, just saying like, "I'll be back, honey."
Yeah,
and that's the last you see of him.
It's weird. I mean, it's like fine, everything. I still love the movies, but I feel like those moments would be scrubbed out in a writer's room these days. They don't like that stuff. I think they scrub most of that shit out.
Yeah,
or at least the editor would. But I kind of why I like these movies is you can talk about them for hours,
absolutely,
which we've done 90 minutes.
Good Lord.
All right. Cool.
Very.
That's the first episode, Freddy vs. Jason. Hope you liked it.
We'll be better on the next one. I'll be more prepared on the next one.
Check our Patreon out. We're putting this first one out for everybody for free, and then the other ones will be on the Patreon for the other installments in these 2 film series, and maybe we'll do some more stuff. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Kill. Ma.
2. Fuck.